Mountain Man paid $1 for a widow with a sack on her head. That's what the folks in Bitterroot Pass are still whispering. $1, one woman, face covered, no past anyone cared to ask about. But when he cut her free, he didn't just change her fate, he lit a fuse beneath the whole valley. Behind that burlap sack is something this town ain't ready to reckon with. Now the wind's shifting, the law's looking nervous, and folks are asking questions they never dared before. What did he see in her the others didn't? And what happens when the one they tried to bury comes back, holding the one thing they all need? Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across distances, backgrounds, and hearts. If values like respect, courage, and compassion still guide you, then you're part of this story too. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Bitterroot's muddy main street as Silas McCrae guided his heavily laden pack mule toward the monthly auction. His weathered boots creaked against worn stirrups, the familiar weight of beaver and fox pelts swaying behind him. The crisp mountain air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, mixing with the earthier smells of horses and humanity that marked the edge of civilization. The gathering crowd drew his attention before he could properly dismount. Rough laughter and cruel jeers rose above the general murmur, pulling him toward the auction block like an invisible rope. There, beneath the fading light, stood a sight that made his throat tighten. A woman, silent and still as stone, her face hidden beneath a crude burlap sack. Her hands were bound with rough twine that bit into her skin. Judge Harrison, his face flushed with cheap whiskey, swayed slightly as he called out, $2. Who will give me $2 for this fine specimen? His words slurred together, drawing another round of cruel laughter from the crowd. Come now, gentlemen, surely she's worth that much for cooking and cleaning. Silas's jaw clenched as he watched. No one stepped forward. The woman remained motionless, her head bowed, but something in her stance spoke of dignity under duress. The evening wind tugged at her simple dress, revealing worn boots beneath the hem. Half-breed, someone muttered from the crowd. Ain't worth the trouble. The slur hung in the air like poison. Silas felt something stir in his chest, a feeling he thought long buried with his wife and son. Before he could think better of it, his voice cut through the ugly silence. $1. The laughter that followed was immediate and harsh. Judge Harrison peered at him through bleary eyes. $1? That's less than my starting bid, McCrae. It's more than anyone else is offering, Silas replied evenly, already pulling the coin from his pocket. The silver dollar caught the last rays of sunlight as he held it up. The judge's shoulders slumped in defeat or disinterest. Sold then. Take her and get out of my sight. Silas approached the woman slowly, like he would a spooked deer. His knife made quick work of the twine around her wrists, revealing angry red marks beneath. With gentle hands, he removed the burlap sack, revealing a young face with features that spoke of mixed heritage. Cherokee, he guessed, though it wasn't his place to ask. The townsfolk dispersed quickly, their entertainment concluded, though their whispers followed like shadows. Savage's widow, and worse. Silas ignored them, leading the woman toward the whitewashed church at the end of the street. The setting sun painted its steeple gold, but the welcome they received was anything but golden. Reverend Walsh stood in the doorway, his thin face pinched with disapproval. We don't take her kind here, McCrae. You know that. She needs sanctuary, Silas argued, but the preacher's expression remained hard as granite. Then give it to her yourself, Walsh replied, closing the heavy wooden door with a final-sounding thud. Night was falling fast now, bringing with it the first bite of mountain cold. Silas led the woman to his rented cabin on the outskirts of town, the familiar crunch of snow beneath their boots the only sound between them. Inside, he built up the fire until warmth began to chase the shadows from the corners. The woman stood by the hearth, firelight dancing across her features. She hadn't spoken a word since he'd bought her freedom, and Silas found himself at a loss. What had he done? What was he supposed to do now? He'd acted on instinct, on some half-remembered sense of right and wrong, but hadn't thought beyond that moment. He busied himself with putting on coffee, the familiar routine helping to settle his thoughts. The cabin's single room suddenly felt smaller than it had that morning. the silence between them heavy with unasked questions. Outside, a coyote called to its mate, the lonely sound echoing off the mountains that loomed dark against the star-filled sky. The coffee pot bubbled on the stove and Silas poured 2 cups, offering one to his unexpected guest. She accepted with a slight nod, her first real acknowledgement of his presence. As she wrapped her fingers around the warm tin cup, Silas caught sight of the rope burns on her wrists and felt that same protective anger rise in his chest again. He'd bought her for $1, but the real price for both of them remained to be seen. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the cabin's weathered walls in soft golden light. Silas stirred from his makeshift bed near the door, his joints stiff from sleeping on the hard floor. The woman sat exactly where he'd left her, perched on the edge of his single chair, the burlap sack still covering her features. Her dark eyes, visible through the rough holes, studied the dying embers in the fireplace. "Ma'am," he said softly, not wanting to startle her, "you must be hungry." He moved slowly toward the storage chest, pulling out dried beef and cornbread from his meager supplies. The floorboards creaked beneath his boots as he set the food before her on the table. She took only the smallest portion, her movements careful and deliberate. Through the coarse fabric of the sack, her voice emerged, barely above a whisper, "Awanita." Silas paused in his morning routine. "That's your name?" She nodded once, then fell silent again. After they'd eaten, Silas saddled his horse and helped Awanita mount the pack mule. She didn't remove the sack, and he didn't ask her to. The morning air bit cold and sharp as they set out toward his trapper's line shack, tucked away in the high hills. The journey was slow. Silas noticed Awanita's slight wince with each step of the mule, the way she favored her right side. The rope burns on her wrists stood angry and red against her skin. He kept the pace gentle, leading them along the safest paths through the rising terrain. 2 hours passed before the line shack came into view, a humble structure of rough-hewn logs nestled against a stand of towering pines. Inside, Silas quickly got a fire going in the pot-bellied stove. The single room was sparse but solid, a narrow cot, a table with 1 chair, and shelves lined with basic provisions. Awanita stood quietly in the center of the room, making no complaint about the humble surroundings. Her silence spoke of a dignity that transcended circumstances. "I need to chop more wood," Silas said, reaching for his axe. "Will you be all right?" She nodded, and he stepped outside into the crisp mountain air. The rhythmic thunk of the axe against wood helped order his thoughts, but questions still weighed heavy on his mind. What circumstances had led to her being auctioned like cattle? What was he supposed to do now? The sun had begun its westward slide when he returned, arms laden with split logs. He stopped in the doorway, surprised by the transformation inside. The floor had been swept clean, the shelves organized, and a pot of rabbit stew simmered on the stove, filling the shack with savory aromas. They ate in silence as darkness gathered outside. Silas couldn't help but notice how she managed to eat carefully around the edges of the sack, never lifting it enough to reveal her face. The quiet between them felt less strained now, shaped by shared work and simple courtesy rather than fear. The first snowflakes began to fall as night settled in fully, dusting the window with white. Awanita rose from her place by the fire and moved to where Silas's saddlebags hung near the door. Her hands trembled slightly as she withdrew a folded document and a carefully drawn map, placing them gently on the table between them. "My husband," she said, her voice stronger now but touched with grief, "filed a treaty-based water claim before they killed him." Her fingers traced the lines on the map, showing the path of the valley's spring. They killed him for this land. Silas studied the documents in the lamplight, understanding dawning. The spring she indicated was the main water source for the entire valley. Whoever controlled it controlled everything downstream. The treaty claim, if valid, would give her legal rights that many would find inconvenient. The snow fell harder outside, but neither of them moved. The revelation hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Silas looked at Awanita, seeing her now not just as someone he'd rescued, but as a woman fighting for justice in a world that had tried to silence her. Dawn hadn't yet broken when Silas lit the oil lamp, its warm glow casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn table. The documents Awanita had given him lay spread before him, the territorial seal catching the lamplight. His weathered fingers traced the careful lines of the map, showing Bitterroot Pass in detailed strokes. The spring originated high in the mountains, threading down through rocky slopes before feeding into the valley below. The water rights treaty beside it bore official markings and signatures. Silas might not be learned in law, but he'd seen enough contracts in his time to recognize the weight of this one. The dead husband's signature stood bold at the bottom, the ink a permanent testament to his final act. "This is why they did it," he said softly, more to himself than to Awanita, who sat quietly by the stove. "This paper gives you rights to all the water that feeds into town." Through the sack's rough weave, Awanita's eyes met his. "They buried more than my husband that day. They buried my name, my rights, my voice." Silas folded the documents with careful hands, tucking them securely inside his leather vest. "There's someone in town might help. Mrs. Hetty Clarkson. She handles legal matters since her husband passed. Used to be the schoolmarm, but she's got a sharp mind for law." The morning air bit cold as Silas saddled his mule. He helped Awanita mount, noting how she moved with more sureness today, though the veil remained. The trail down from the hills stretched before them, winding through stands of pine and across open meadows frosted with morning dew. They rode in silence for a while, the mule's hooves marking a steady rhythm on the packed earth. Then Awanita began to speak, her voice low but clear. "John, my husband, he was different from the others. He saw me as a person, not just some Indian woman." Her hands tightened on the reins. "We married in secret, just us and the minister from the mission church 40 miles north. John knew the townspeople wouldn't understand." Silas kept his eyes on the trail but listened intently as she continued. "He was surveying the territory, marking boundaries for the new treaties. That's how we met. I showed him the old paths, the springs our people had used for generations." A tremor entered her voice. He understood the importance of water rights, said everything had to be legal and proper. The trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file. Above them, a hawk circled lazily in the morning thermals. "The day he went to file the deed," Awanita paused, gathering strength. "He never came home. They found him 3 days later in Shadow Creek Canyon. Said it was an accident. His horse spooked, threw him down the ravine. But John was a good rider and his horse came back with bullet holes in the saddle." Silas's jaw tightened. He'd seen too many accidents in his time on the frontier. "After that, they started calling me crazy, said I was making up stories about being married. The judge, the same one who put me up for auction, he said no record existed of any marriage or deed." Her voice hardened. "But John was careful. He made copies, hid them where they wouldn't think to look." The town came into view as they crested the last rise. Morning smoke rose from chimneys, and the street was already busy with wagons and townspeople starting their day. Silas led them down a side alley, avoiding the main thoroughfare. Mrs. Clarkson's house stood at the quiet end of Cedar Street, its white clapboard walls neat despite the peeling paint. A small sign by the door read, "Legal Services, Inquire Within." Silas helped Awanita dismount, then tied the mule to the hitching post. He knocked firmly on the door, keeping his body angled to shield Awanita from curious eyes. After a moment, they heard footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Hetty Clarkson, her gray hair neatly pinned back, ink stains on her fingers suggesting she'd already been at work despite the early hour. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Silas. He rarely came to town, then moved to the veiled figure behind him. Understanding flickered across her features, followed by a carefully controlled expression of professional courtesy. "Mr. McCrae," she said evenly, "I believe you'd better come inside." She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Both of you." The mountain air carried the sharp scent of pine as Awanita and Silas worked side by side on the line shack's roof. She handed him cedar shakes one by one, her movements precise and purposeful. The old roof had leaked during the last storm, but their shared labor would make it strong again. Silas watched from the corner of his eye as Awanita worked, still wearing the burlap sack but moving with increasing confidence. Her hands were skilled, knowing just how to overlap each wooden shake for the best protection against rain and snow. The veil didn't slow her down. She'd adapted to seeing through its rough weave. Later that afternoon, while gathering kindling by the creek, Awanita heard a weak bleating. Following the sound, she discovered a young fawn tangled in thick brush, its legs caught in thorny vines. The little creature's eyes were wide with fear, but something in Awanita's gentle approach seemed to calm it. She worked slowly, carefully freeing each delicate leg from the thorns. The fawn's mother was nowhere in sight, probably taken by wolves or mountain lions. When the last vine fell away, the fawn didn't bolt. Instead, it wobbled on unsteady legs and pressed close to Awanita's side. Back at the shack, Silas returned from hunting to find Awanita sitting on the porch, the fawn curled up beside her. He paused, the string of fresh-caught fish in his hand momentarily forgotten. The sight stirred something in his chest, something he thought had died years ago with his wife and son. "Reckon we got ourselves another mouth to feed," he said quietly, setting down his gear. Over the next day, they fell into an easy rhythm. Silas smoked venison from his hunt, the rich aroma filling the air around the shack. Awanita gathered herbs and tended to the fawn, which followed her like a shadow. They worked separately but aware of each other, their silence comfortable rather than strained. As evening approached on the second day, Awanita knelt by the hearth, adding wood to the fire. The flames cast flickering light across the cabin's walls. Her hands rose slowly to the burlap sack that had hidden her face since Silas first saw her at the auction. Silas sat in his chair whittling a piece of pine. He kept his movement steady, giving her the space to choose her own moment. With careful fingers, Awanita untied the rough twine. The sack slipped away, revealing her face in the firelight. Fading bruises marked her cheek and jaw, but her eyes were clear and calm. She met Silas's gaze without flinching. Silas looked at her steadily, his weathered face softening. "That's better," he said simply, and returned to his whittling. Later that night, they sat together on the porch, watching moonlight paint silver patterns on the fresh snow. The fawn slept nearby in a bed of straw Awanita had prepared. Stars wheeled overhead in the vast mountain sky, and somewhere in the distance a lone wolf called to its pack. "John loved this land," Awanita said softly, breaking their comfortable silence. "He understood its spirit, even though he wasn't born to it." She wrapped her shawl tighter against the night air. "There's a cedar tree up by the spring, the big one with branches that sweep the ground. He carved my name into it the day after we married." Silas listened, his pipe sending lazy smoke rings into the still air. "He said the land would be ours." Her voice grew stronger with the memory. Not just a piece of paper with signatures, but a real home. A place where our children could grow up proud of both their parents' peoples. Silas nodded slowly, thinking of the traveling circuit judge who made his rounds every month. Judge Clay Tillman was known for his fairness, unlike the corrupt local judge who'd tried to auction Awanita away. If they could present her case properly, with the documents and witnesses like Mrs. Clarkson. He pulled out his notebook, worn and water-stained from years in his saddlebag, and began sketching out their plan. They had 2 weeks until Judge Tillman's arrival, 2 weeks to prepare their evidence, gather supporters, and make their stand for justice. As he wrote, Awanita hummed softly, a melody that seemed to rise from the land itself, ancient and full of hope. The fawn stirred in its sleep, and overhead, the stars continued their eternal dance across the mountain sky. Dawn painted the mountain peaks in soft gold as Silas saddled his mule. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and fresh snow. He checked his pocket watch. A 4-hour ride to the logging camp lay ahead if he wanted to send that telegraph to Judge Tillman's office. "I'll be back before dark," he told Awanita, who stood in the doorway with the orphaned fawn at her feet. "Keep the door barred." She nodded, one hand resting on the rough-hewn doorframe. Since removing the burlap sack, her face showed a quiet determination that matched her growing strength. Silas rode down through the timber, following game trails he knew by heart. The logging camp's telegraph office was the nearest connection to the outside world. though he preferred avoiding its rough company. But they needed the judge's confirmation, needed to know exactly when Clay Tillman would arrive and if he'd grant them a proper hearing. The sun climbed higher as Silas descended into the valley. He didn't know that back at the line shack, trouble was already stumbling up the mountain path. Boone Fletcher, a ragged trapper known for his mean temper and worse aim, had been drinking since sunrise. He'd heard whispers in town about the veiled woman Silas McCrae had bought for $1, and his addled mind spun dark tales of witchcraft and savage curses. The fawn was the first to sense him coming. Its ears pricked up and it pressed close to Awanita's skirts as she hung wash on the line. She heard the uneven footsteps too late. Boone was already in the clearing, his bloodshot eyes fixed on her face. "So it's true," he slurred, swaying slightly. "McCrae's got himself a witch woman up here." Awanita stood very still, her hands steady on the wet cloth. "This is private property, Mr. Fletcher." "Private?" He spat in the dirt. "Ain't nothing private about stolen land. Heard tell you was claiming water rights, claiming papers and such." He took an unsteady step forward. "Heard tell your man got what was coming, trying to steal white folks' water." The fawn darted behind the woodpile as Boone advanced. Awanita felt her heart hammering but kept her voice level. "I have legal claim to this land. Judge Tillman will confirm it." "Legal claim?" Boone's laugh was ugly. "Ain't no judge gonna listen to your lies and heathen magic. Probably bewitched poor McCrae already." His hand strayed to the knife at his belt. "Maybe we ought to settle this mountain business right now." Awanita backed slowly toward the cabin door, remembering Silas's warning to stay inside. "Leave this place, Mr. Fletcher. You're not welcome here." "Not welcome?" His face twisted. "You're the one ain't welcome, witch woman, you and your devil marks and your water-stealing ways." He drew the knife, its blade catching the sunlight. "Maybe I should mark you proper, teach you about—" The cabin door slammed behind Awanita as she darted inside, throwing the heavy bar in place. Boone's curses grew louder, then faded as he stumbled away, shouting threats about returning with others who'd set things right. The hours until dusk stretched long. Awanita kept the rifle Silas had left close at hand, though she'd never fired one. The fawn huddled beneath her cot, trembling at every sound from the forest. When Silas finally returned, the relief on Awanita's face told him something was wrong before she spoke a word. He listened grimly as she recounted Boone's visit, his weathered hands tightening on his saddle horn. "Got the judge's reply at least," he said after she finished. "He'll be here in 12 days. Promised us a proper hearing." He unsaddled his mule, movements precise and controlled. "But first, we need to make sure you can protect yourself proper." That night, after checking the cabin's perimeter twice, Silas brought out his spare rifle, an old single-action piece with a smooth walnut stock. "We don't aim to fight," he told Awanita as she held the weapon uncertainly. "But we don't back down, neither." He showed her how to load it, how to work the action without jamming. Her hands were steady as she practiced, the same sure touch she used for healing now learning to defend. The fawn watched from its corner as Silas guided her through, aiming at a tin can on the woodpile. "Keep your breathing even," he instructed. "Squeeze slow, don't pull, like you're pressing herbs, gentle-like." Awanita nodded, sighting down the barrel. Her finger found the trigger, and for the first time since her husband's death, she felt the power to stand her ground. Not with magic or curses like Boone feared, but with the same quiet strength that had kept her alive this long. The tin can waited in the gathering dark, a silent witness to her transformation from victim to defender of her own destiny. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's small window as Awanita spread the documents across the rough-hewn table. Her fingers traced the territorial seal, pressing each wrinkled corner flat. The papers had been hidden for so long, first in her dress hem, then in Silas's saddlebag. Now they lay in plain sight, their ink faded but clear. "Start from the beginning," Silas said, leaning against the doorframe. "Tell it like you're facing the judge himself." Awanita straightened her shoulders, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Your Honor, I am Awanita, widow of James Harrison, treaty surveyor. These documents prove our legal claim to the spring waters of Bitterroot Pass." She held up the hand-drawn map. My husband filed this claim 3 years ago before he was... Her voice caught. Take your time, Silas encouraged softly. Ain't no rush. She drew a deep breath. Before he was murdered for trying to protect our rights to this land. The creak of saddle leather outside drew their attention. Hetty Clarkson's elderly mule appeared in the yard. The school teacher perched sideways on its back, her gray hair escaping its neat bun. Judge Tillman's coming, she announced without preamble, accepting Silas's help down from the saddle. 4 days' time. He's finishing circuit in Sweetwater Valley, then riding straight here. Inside the cabin, Hetty studied the documents spread across the table while warming her hands by the stove. You should stay with me in town, she offered, turning to Awanita. My house is small, but it's safer than up here alone. Awanita shook her head firmly. I won't hide anymore, not in town, not anywhere. She touched the papers gently. This land is mine by law and marriage both. I'll face whatever comes from claiming it. Silas nodded approvingly. Reckon we ought to gather some witnesses then. Make this proper legal-like. Little Bear might come, Awanita suggested. He trades with you sometimes, doesn't he? That Crow boy? Smart kid. Silas scratched his chin thoughtfully. Could ride down tomorrow, see if he's at the trading post. The next morning brought Little Bear up the mountain trail, his pony loaded with gifts. Cornmeal ground fine as dust and dried squash, sweet as summer memories. The 12-year-old boy moved with quiet confidence, showing none of the fear or suspicion that marked most interactions between settlers and natives. My grandmother says you know the old ways of healing, he said to Awanita in careful English, helping her store the food. She says you helped her sister's cough last winter. Awanita smiled, remembering the elderly woman and her herbs. The old ways still work if we remember them right. Little Bear nodded seriously. I will tell the judge what I know, how you help people, how you belong to this land. He gestured to the spring visible through the trees. Water knows its true family. They spent the afternoon arranging the cabin for the upcoming testimony. Hetty sorted the documents chronologically, showing Awanita how to present each piece clearly. Silas moved the furniture to create more space, while Little Bear helped sweep the floor with a pine branch broom. Tell it straight and clear, Hetty advised, adjusting her spectacles. Judge Tillman's fair-minded, but he needs facts he can stand on. Dates, names, boundaries. She tapped the map. Show him where your husband marked the spring where he filed the claim. Awanita practiced her testimony again, her voice growing steadier with each telling. The story emerged like water from stone. Her secret marriage to James, his determination to secure their rights legally, the ambush that left her a widow. Little Bear listened intently, occasionally offering a word or gesture of support. You speak with truth, he said simply when she finished. The judge will hear it. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Hetty prepared to leave, promising to return before the judge's arrival. Little Bear also mounted his pony, the empty food bags rolled neatly behind his saddle. My grandmother will come too, he assured them. She remembers when your husband helped our people understand the treaty words. She has not forgotten. Watching them descend the mountain trail, Awanita felt something shift inside her, like ice breaking up in spring. The documents lay protected on the table. Her voice had grown strong in practice, and witnesses would speak for her truth. She was no longer the veiled woman sold for $1. She was Awanita, rightful owner of Bitterroot's waters, ready to reclaim her place in the valley. Silas stood beside her on the cabin porch, his presence solid as the mountains themselves. 4 days, he said quietly. Reckon we're as ready as we'll ever be. The morning sun cast long shadows across Bitterroot's dusty main street as Sheriff Cobb paced outside the mercantile. His boots kicked up little clouds with each turn. Inside, the preacher and Judge Harrison, the same one who'd conducted that dollar auction weeks ago, huddled near the counter. That mountain man's cabin, Cobb growled through the open door. Someone said they saw a woman up there, dark hair, native dress. The preacher's face tightened. The one from the auction? We assumed she'd left the territory. Seems not. The sheriff's hand rested on his gun belt. "And now I hear tell of some traveling judge coming through and Hetty Clarkson carrying papers up that mountain." Judge Harrison's ruddy face paled. "Papers? What kind of papers?" But before they could discuss it further, a rider appeared at the edge of town. Judge Clay Tillman sat tall in his saddle, his black coat dusted with trail dirt, saddlebags heavy with law books. The sight sent the three men scattering like leaves in autumn wind. Up at the line shack, Awanita arranged fresh-cut pine boughs around the cabin's single room. The sweet scent mixed with wood smoke from the stove where coffee bubbled. Silas had built extra benches from split logs, setting them in neat rows. Little Bear arrived first with his grandmother, her silver braids wrapped in red cloth. Then came three traders who'd known James Harrison, followed by Hetty Clarkson leading her mule loaded with additional documents, territorial maps, and treaty copies. Judge Tillman appeared exactly at the appointed hour, his gray mare picking carefully up the narrow trail. He ducked through the cabin door, removing his hat as Silas offered him the room's only proper chair. "Quite a gathering," the judge observed, taking in the mixed group of settlers and natives. His eyes settled on Awanita with careful respect. "I understand you have a land claim to present." Hetty stepped forward, spreading the documents on a clean blanket before him. "Your Honor, these papers establish Mrs. Harrison's legal right to the Bitterroot Spring and surrounding acreage through both treaty law and marriage certificate." The judge examined each document carefully, asking pointed questions about dates and boundaries. When he came to the treaty itself, he looked up at Awanita. "Would you read the relevant clause, ma'am?" Awanita stepped forward, her fingers steady as she took the paper. Her voice filled the small cabin, clear as the spring itself. "By terms of this agreement, water rights to the natural spring at Bitterroot Pass shall remain with the original inhabitants and their legal descendants in perpetuity." She continued reading, detailing how her husband had properly filed the claim, how their marriage certificate predated his death. Little Bear's grandmother nodded throughout, occasionally adding soft words in her own language that made the judge lean forward with interest. The afternoon light was growing long when Judge Tillman finally sat back. "The documentation is complete," he announced. "The treaty terms are clear." He pulled out his own papers, ink and seal. "By the power of this court, I hereby validate Mrs. Awanita Harrison's rightful claim to the Bitterroot Spring and surrounding treaty lands." The scratch of his pen seemed to echo in the hushed cabin. When he pressed his seal into the red wax, Awanita's hand found Silas's rough fingers and squeezed tight. After the witnesses departed and the judge rode back toward town, Awanita and Silas sat on the cabin porch watching evening paint the mountains gold. The orphaned fawn wobbled over, nosing hopefully at Awanita's skirts. She pulled dried apple pieces from her pocket, feeding the small creature while humming a gentle tune, a lullaby her mother had sung about rivers returning to their source. The fawn's tail twitched happily as it ate from her palm. "Never heard that song before," Silas said softly. "It's about finding your way home." Awanita smiled, scratching behind the fawn's ears, about belonging somewhere so deep, not even winter can freeze it away. Their eyes met in the fading light. "Silas," she said, her voice warm with new confidence, "would you call me by my name? My real name?" He nodded, understanding the gift she offered. "Awanita," he said carefully, respecting each syllable. "It suits you." The fawn curled up at their feet as darkness settled over the valley. Their valley now, won back by truth and justice and patience. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight was for celebrating this simple peace: a home, a name spoken in friendship, and hope blooming like spring flowers after long snow. The peaceful night shattered like glass. Smoke crept under the cabin door, thick and choking. Silas jolted awake first, his eyes stinging. The wall behind the stove glowed orange-red, flames already licking up the dry timber. "Awanita!" He shook her shoulder roughly. "Fire!" She scrambled up, grabbing the land deed papers and shoving them into her dress pocket. The heat pressed against them like a living thing. Smoke filled their lungs as they stumbled toward the door. A frightened bleat stopped Awanita in her tracks. The fawn had wedged itself under the bed, trembling. She turned back, reaching. "No time!" Silas grabbed her arm, but she twisted free. I can't leave." The roof beam cracked overhead with a sound like thunder. Silas yanked the door open. Fresh air rushed in, feeding the flames. They roared higher, cutting Ajuanita off from the bed. The fawn's cries grew desperate, then silent. Ajuanita's scream tore through the night. Silas dragged her outside. They stumbled into darkness thick with wood smoke. The cabin blazed behind them, painting everything in hellish orange light. Shadows moved in the trees. Dark figures on horses emerged, faces hidden behind cloth masks. 6 men, maybe 7. Silas reached for his rifle, but it was still inside the burning cabin. "There she is," a voice growled. "Get her!" 2 riders charged forward. Silas pushed Ajuanita toward the creek. "Run!" She sprinted 3 steps before a lasso caught her around the waist. She hit the ground hard as they dragged her backward. Silas lunged to grab her hands, but something crashed against the back of his head. Stars exploded across his vision. He fell to his knees. Through blurring eyes, he saw Ajuanita fighting as they hauled her onto a horse. The pistol struck him again, harder. He tasted blood. "Should we finish him?" someone asked above him. "Leave him. The cold will do it for us." A boot connected with his ribs. Pain shot through his chest. He tried to stand but couldn't find his feet. The last thing he saw was Ajuanita being carried away, her arms reaching toward him as the flames consumed their home. The world went black. Cold water shocked him awake. He lay face down in the creek, icy mountain runoff washing over his shoulders. Every breath sent daggers through his chest. Cracked ribs, maybe broken. His shirt was stiff with dried blood. Silas tried to push himself up. His arms shook. The morning sun hurt his eyes. How long had he been out? The cabin was a smoking ruin, still giving off waves of heat. He heard soft footsteps approaching through the brush. His fingers scrabbled weakly for a weapon, finding only mud. "Mr. Silas?" Little Bear's voice. The boy knelt beside him, dark eyes wide with concern. "Don't move. You're hurt bad." "Ajuanita," Silas croaked. "They took her." "I know. I saw the riders." Little Bear helped him sit up slowly. They went toward town, but then turned north on the old mining road. Silas's head throbbed. He touched the gash where the pistol had struck him, wincing. "Need to follow them." "Not yet." Little Bear whistled softly. His grandmother appeared from the trees, carrying herbs and bandages. "First we fix you up, then we track them." They built a lean-to using fallen branches and Little Bear's wool blanket. The grandmother crushed herbs into a paste, spreading it over Silas's wounds while singing softly. Little Bear brought water in a tin cup. "The fawn," Silas remembered suddenly. His throat tightened. It was trapped inside. Little Bear nodded sadly. "I heard it. Nothing you could do." The grandmother wrapped Silas's ribs tightly with strips of clean cloth. Each breath still hurt, but the binding helped. The herb paste cooled the fire in his wounds. She spoke to Little Bear in their language, her voice grave. "She says you need rest," Little Bear translated. "But she also says sometimes a man can't rest when his heart is running." Silas closed his eyes. He saw Ajuanita reaching for him as they took her away, saw the fawn's terrified eyes in the smoke. Everything they'd built, everything they'd won back, gone in one violent night. "I'm going after her." His voice was rough with smoke and determination. "Soon as I can stand." Little Bear gripped his shoulder. "We'll help you. My grandmother knows these mountains better than those men. They can't hide from us." Silas nodded, grateful for their help but sick with worry for Ajuanita. The lean-to kept the worst of the wind off, but he couldn't stop shivering. Not from cold, from rage. From the need to move, to follow, to find her. He made himself lie still as the grandmother continued her healing work. But his mind raced down dark trails, following phantom hoofprints, searching for any sign of where they might have taken Ajuanita. He would find her. No matter what it took, he would bring her home. The root cellar's darkness pressed around Ajuanita like a tomb. Cold seeped through the dirt floor, numbing her feet as she sat with her back against the rough stone wall. Above, Heavy boots paced across wooden floorboards. Keys rattled, and the cellar door creaked open. Sheriff Cobb's shadow filled the doorway, lamplight casting his face in harsh angles. "Mighty quiet down here," he said, descending the steps. "Had time to think about your situation?" Awanita lifted her chin but remained silent. The sheriff's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That fancy paper don't mean nothing now." He pulled the treaty copy from his vest. "Judge Tillman's word against mine, and he ain't here no more." The sheriff held the document close to his lamp. "Last chance. Sign this here paper saying you give up the claim." "No." Awanita's voice was soft but firm. The sheriff's face hardened. With deliberate slowness, he gripped the treaty and tore it down the middle. The ripping sound echoed in the cellar. He tore it again and again, letting the pieces flutter to the dirt floor. "Ain't no one coming for you this time," he growled. "That mountain man's probably dead by now. Sign the paper or you'll rot down here." Awanita closed her eyes, one hand moving to the ring hanging from a leather cord around her neck. Her husband had carved it from cedar wood, smooth and simple. She held it tight, lips moving in silent prayer. The sheriff spat on the torn papers. "Have it your way." He stomped up the stairs, slamming the door. The lock clicked with terrible finality. In the darkness, Awanita gathered the torn pieces of the treaty, carefully folding them into her dress pocket. She wouldn't let them see her cry. Instead, she sang softly, an old healing song her grandmother had taught her. The melody filled the cellar, keeping fear at bay. Miles away, Little Bear urged Silas's old mule down the mountain trail. The animal knew the way, picking carefully over loose rocks and fallen branches. The boy's heart pounded with each passing minute. He had to reach Mrs. Clarkson before the sheriff discovered the original treaty. The schoolteacher's small house sat on the outskirts of town, its windows dark. Little Bear tied the mule behind her barn and crept to the back door. He tapped 3 times, then twice more. Their secret signal. Hetty opened the door quickly, ushering him inside. "What's happened? You're white as a ghost." Little Bear told her everything. The fire, Awanita's capture, Silas's injuries. Hetty's face grew grimmer with each detail. "They'll come for the treaty next," she said, moving to her desk. She pulled out a false bottom, revealing the original document. "We need to hide this somewhere they'll never look." She rolled the treaty carefully, sliding it into an old stovepipe wrapped in oilcloth. "Take this to your grandmother. No one will search her lodge." From a cabinet, she retrieved a Winchester rifle and a box of shells. "For Silas. Tell him I'm gathering folks who'll stand with us. Traders who've known Awanita's family, farmers who respect the old treaties." Little Bear nodded, tucking the rifle into his saddle scabbard. Silas said to hurry. "The sheriff ain't known for patience." "Go careful," Hetty warned, "and tell Silas to wait for my signal before coming to town. We need numbers on our side." The boy slipped away into the pre-dawn darkness. His mule, knowing home lay ahead, moved faster now despite its double burden. He found Silas sitting up in the lean-to drinking willow bark tea. The mountain man's face was pale, but his eyes were clear and hard. Little Bear's grandmother had bound his ribs tight with strips of deerskin, and the herb poultice had drawn most of the swelling from his head wound. "Mrs. Clarkson sent this." Little Bear handed over the rifle. "She's getting help. People who'll stand with us." Silas checked the weapon with practiced hands. Good woman, that Hetty. He tried standing, grimacing at the pain in his side. Time we moved closer to town. "My father's coming too," Little Bear said. "He was away trading, but I sent word. He's bringing 3 more men." "Much obliged." Silas managed to get to his feet, leaning against a tree. "Your grandmother's medicine works quick." The old woman appeared with more tea and a bundle of dried meat. She spoke rapidly to Little Bear, who translated. "She says you need 1 more day to heal. The spirits say to wait for the right moment." Silas wanted to argue, but wisdom won out over impatience. They'd need every ounce of strength for what lay ahead. He settled back against the lean-to's wall, watching Little Bear clean the new rifle. "1 day," he agreed. "Then we go get her back." The morning sun cast long shadows across Bitterroot's main street as Silas guided his mule toward the white clapboard church. His ribs ached with each breath, and dried blood still crusted his collar, but determination drove him forward. The sound of hymn singing drifted through the church's open windows, mixing with the crisp mountain air. Silas dismounted stiffly, steadying himself against the hitching post. Through the windows, he could see Sheriff Cobb in his usual back pew, looking mighty pleased with himself. The sight made Silas's blood boil. Without hesitation, he pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The hinges creaked, and the singing faltered. Heads turned as Silas limped down the center aisle, his spurs ringing against the floorboards. "Service ain't over," the preacher called out, gripping his pulpit. "This can't wait." Silas's voice carried to every corner. "Sheriff Cobb's got an innocent woman locked in his cellar, a woman with legal right to her land." The sheriff stood, hand moving to his gun. "Now see here, McCrae. We all saw what you did," Silas continued, addressing the congregation. "Burning down her home, beating me half to death, taking her prisoner when she's done nothing wrong except claim what's rightfully hers." Murmurs rippled through the pews. Some folks looked away, shamefaced. Others glared defiantly. "That half-breed has no rights here," Cobb snarled, drawing his pistol. "And neither do you, mountain man." The church doors burst open again. Judge Tillman strode in, snow dusting his shoulders, a deputy marshal at his side. The judge's face was thunderous. "Put that gun away, Cobb," Tillman ordered. "You're under arrest for unlawful imprisonment, assault, and destruction of property." The sheriff's face went pale. "You got no jurisdiction." "I have every jurisdiction." Judge Tillman produced a warrant. "Deputy Marshal, take his badge and gun." The deputy moved forward, steady and practiced. Cobb looked around wildly, but found no allies willing to stand with him. His shoulders slumped as the deputy disarmed him. "Now," Judge Tillman said, "we're going to the jailhouse. All of us. This ends today." The congregation filed out into the street, following the judge. At the jailhouse, Tillman demanded the cellar keys. The deputy kept his rifle trained on Cobb as the sheriff reluctantly handed them over. Silas moved to open the cellar door himself, but Judge Tillman stopped him. "Let's do this proper," he said. "Mrs. Awanita McCrae, by order of this court, you are free to come out." For a moment, nothing moved. Then footsteps sounded on the cellar stairs. Awanita emerged into the sunlight, her head held high. She had braided her long black hair, weaving red beads through the plaits, a symbol of her heritage she'd hidden for too long. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they saw her uncovered face for the first time, not because of any mark or blemish, but because of the quiet dignity in her eyes. She looked at each person in turn, unflinching. "Mrs. McCrae," Judge Tillman announced formally, "your land claim is valid and legally binding. The spring and surrounding acres are yours, as documented in the treaty your late husband filed." He turned to address the crowd. "Anyone who interferes with her rights will answer to territorial law?" Awanita's voice was clear and strong. "I don't seek revenge. Only justice and peace." She walked to Silas's side, touching his arm gently. "Thank you for standing by me." The deputy led Sheriff Cobb away in irons, headed for the territorial prison to await trial. The townspeople began dispersing, some nodding respectfully to Awanita, others hurrying away with downcast eyes. Judge Tillman approached Awanita and Silas. "The law may be slow sometimes, but it bends toward justice in the end. Your husband believed that. I'm glad to see his faith proven right." Awanita pulled the torn pieces of the treaty copy from her pocket. "He destroyed this, but not the truth it held." "No," the judge agreed. "Truth has a way of surviving, just like you did." The morning sun climbed higher, melting the fresh snow. Awanita stood free under the open sky, her face uncovered, her rights restored. Justice had finally dawned in Bitterroot. The spring thaw brought new beginnings to Bitterroot Valley. Where Awanita's burned shack once stood, fresh-cut timber now lay ready for rebuilding. She had chosen to stay, to reclaim not just her land, but her place in the community. The morning air rang with the steady rhythm of Silas's hammer as he drove posts into the softening earth. "These'll hold strong," he said, testing a corner post with calloused hands. "Good pine, cut at the right time." Ajuanita nodded, sorting through the herbs she'd gathered that morning. Her quiet presence had become a fixture on the land, as natural as the spring-fed creek that bubbled nearby. Some townsfolk still crossed the street when they saw her coming, but others had begun to show small kindnesses. Mrs. Hetty Clarkson had been the first, arriving one morning with a patchwork quilt tucked under her arm. "Every home needs something to warm it," she'd said, pressing the blanket into Ajuanita's hands. The squares were worn soft with age and love, telling stories of other lives, other homes. Little Bear proved faithful as sunrise, appearing each day to help however he could. His small hands were quick to learn, whether stacking stones for the new hearth or helping Ajuanita sort her medicinal plants. He worked without being asked, pride showing in his careful attention to each task. "My grandmother says you know the old ways," he told Ajuanita one afternoon, watching her hang dried sage. "She says maybe you could teach me sometime." Ajuanita's smile was gentle. "I would be honored," she replied, showing him how to tie the bundles just so. The work of rebuilding filled their days. Silas cut and shaped timbers while Ajuanita mixed mud and straw for chinking. Their movements fell into an easy rhythm, like a dance learned long ago. When Silas's injured ribs troubled him, Ajuanita prepared poultices without a word. When her hands grew raw from labor, he took over the rougher tasks without being asked. The new cabin took shape slowly but surely. Its walls rose straight and true, each log notched precisely into place. Silas had added a wider porch than before, with room for 2 chairs. Ajuanita noticed but said nothing, her heart warming at the thought. "Roof'll be done by week's end," Silas announced one evening, studying his work in the fading light. "Then we can start on the inside." Ajuanita stood beside him, her shoulder nearly touching his. "You've done more than I could have asked," she said softly. "Ain't done yet," he replied, but his gruff tone couldn't hide the gentleness in his eyes. As dusk settled over the valley, Silas lit a brass lantern and hung it by the cabin's door. The flame cast a warm glow across the new-cut wood, a beacon in the gathering dark. Without a word, Ajuanita retrieved a second lantern from her supplies. She filled it with oil, trimmed the wick just right, and lit it from Silas's flame. "2 lights are harder to put out," she said, hanging it beside the first. The twin flames danced together in the evening breeze, their light doubled and strengthened. Silas understood her meaning. In this land where darkness had once seemed to win, where violence had tried to extinguish hope, they had chosen to kindle something new. Not just a home rebuilt, but trust restored, warmth shared, protection offered and accepted. They stood together on the fresh-built porch watching their twin lanterns glow. The evening air carried the scent of pine and promise, while overhead stars began to pepper the darkening sky. From somewhere in the trees, a whip-poor-will called, its song echoing across the valley that was finally, truly, home. Little Bear's voice carried from the creek where he was washing up after the day's work. The boy's presence, like the lantern's steady light, was a reminder that healing could grow from broken ground, that new families could form from scattered pieces. The cabin stood solid behind them, its walls ready to hold warmth and welcome. Tomorrow would bring more work, more small steps toward completion, but tonight they could rest in what they'd built together. Not just timber and stone, but something far more precious. A place where 2 lights shone brighter than one, where shared labor had laid the foundation for something neither had dared to hope for again. The morning sun cast long shadows across the small clearing where Ajuanita knelt, her hands working steady and sure on a piece of cedar wood. The knife moved carefully, each stroke revealing letters beneath the bark. "Little one who taught us trust." Silas watched from a respectful distance, a bundle of wildflowers gathered in his weathered hands. The fawn's final resting place lay beneath an old cottonwood tree, where spring's first shoots pushed through the soil. Together, they placed the marker at the head of the small mound. Awanita's fingers traced the freshly carved words before she began planting the wildflowers one by one: purple lupine, yellow buttercups, and delicate white daisies. "These will bloom every spring," she said softly, patting the earth around each stem, a reminder of new beginnings. Silas nodded, understanding in his silence. He'd seen how the fawn's presence had helped heal something in Awanita, just as its loss had wounded them both. But here, in this quiet moment of remembrance, they found another kind of healing. Back at the cabin, work continued. The roof needed finishing, and they fell into an efficient rhythm, Silas nailing down shingles while Awanita passed them up, one by one. The sound of hammering echoed across the valley, punctuated by the calls of returning spring birds. "Last one," Awanita called, handing up the final shingle. Silas set it in place with careful precision, then sat back on his heels to survey their work. The new roof gleamed in the sunlight, solid and true. Down in Bitterroot, change was stirring like spring wind through new leaves. Judge Tillman called a town meeting in the courthouse, his voice carrying clear and firm through the packed room. "This territory was built on laws and treaties," he declared, standing tall behind his desk. "When we break those treaties, we break the very foundation of our community." The judge's words fell heavy on the assembled townspeople. He spoke of illegal land grabs, of justice denied, of promises broken. In the back row, the preacher shifted uncomfortably in his seat, collar tight against his neck. "I cannot serve where truth is buried," the preacher announced the next day, stepping down from his position. His resignation rippled through the town like stones dropped in still water. Miss Sarah Bradford, newly arrived from back east to teach at the schoolhouse, saw opportunity in the changing tide. She approached the town council with a proposal clutched in her gloved hands. "Every child deserves an education," she stated firmly. "I propose we open our school to all children of the valley, regardless of their heritage." Her words caused a stir, but the seeds of change had already taken root. The next week, Awanita received an unexpected visitor. Mr. Harrison, head of the town water board, stood awkwardly on her new porch, hat in hands. "Ma'am," he said, clearing his throat, "the board recognizes your rightful claim to the spring. We'd like to offer you a seat among us. Your knowledge of the land, well, we reckon it'd be valuable." Awanita studied him for a long moment before nodding. "I accept," she said simply. "The water belongs to all of us." That evening, as shadows lengthened across the valley, Silas found Awanita by the spring. She was watching the water bubble up from the earth, clear and constant as time itself. "Place is coming along nice," he said, settling beside her. The words that followed came slow but sure, like the spring's steady flow. "Reckon I could stay on, help keep things running smooth, if you want." Awanita turned to face him, her eyes meeting his. The silence between them held years of loneliness, of walls built and bridges burned. But it also held these past weeks of shared work, shared meals, shared purpose. "I'd like that," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of choice. Not necessity or fear, but free and clear decision. The spring burbled on beside them, its voice a gentle witness to their words. Above, an eagle circled wide against the evening sky, while below, the valley spread out like a promise kept. Here, where once there had been only silence and shadow, new life was taking root, as sure as wildflowers on a fawn's grave, as steady as water flowing from ancient springs, as true as two people choosing to build something lasting, together. The spring morning dawned clear and bright as Awanita led Silas and Little Bear to the bubbling source of the valley's water. In her arms, she cradled a young cedar sapling, its roots carefully wrapped in damp burlap. The three of them moved with purpose, each carrying tools for the planting. "My husband said the cedar is sacred," Awanita explained, kneeling beside the spring. "It stands guard over precious things." Her fingers worked the soil, preparing a place for the young tree. Little Bear helped dig, his small hands moving earth with careful attention. Silas stood watch, his eyes scanning the tree line out of habit, though the threat had passed. The spring gurgled steadily, its clear water catching morning light. This was Awanita's land now, properly and legally, and the whole valley knew it. As they planted the cedar, more people began arriving. First came Hetty Clarkson, carrying her law books and surveying equipment. Then Mr. Harrison and the water board members, followed by several townspeople with shovels and picks. They gathered awkwardly at first, unsure of their welcome. Awanita stood, brushing soil from her skirts. "The pipeline needs to be laid proper," she said, her voice carrying clear authority. "We'll start here and work down to town." She pointed out the route, and people began organizing themselves into work groups. Little Bear darted between the workers, carrying messages and tools. His quick smile and eager helpfulness seemed to ease the tension, bridging old divides without words. Silas worked alongside the men, his strength making quick work of the heavy lifting. Throughout the day, Awanita moved among the workers, checking the pipeline's path, ensuring the joints were sealed tight. She knew this land intimately, every rise and dip, every rocky patch. Under her guidance, the work progressed steadily. As sunset approached, the main section of pipeline lay secure in its trench. Someone started a small fire near the spring, and people gathered around it, tired but satisfied. The atmosphere had shifted from the morning's awkwardness to something easier, more natural. Little Bear sat cross-legged near the fire, sharing dried berries from his pocket. Hetty discussed water rights with Mr. Harrison, their voices low and respectful. The cedar sapling stood tall against the darkening sky, its young branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. Silas approached Awanita, who stood slightly apart from the group. From his coat pocket, he drew out something wrapped in soft leather. "Made this," he said quietly, placing it in her hands. "Figured you might have use for it." Awanita unwrapped the gift carefully. In her palms lay a comb carved from elk bone, its teeth fine and even, its handle decorated with delicate flowing patterns that reminded her of running water. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface, feeling the care in every detail. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touching one of the carved spirals. "Thank you, Silas." Later that evening, after the workers had gone home and Little Bear had headed back to his family's camp, Awanita sat in her cabin. The burlap sack that had once hidden her face lay spread on her lap. She had washed it carefully, pressed it flat, and now she began to stitch. Her needle moved steadily through the rough fabric, each stitch deliberate and sure. Words took shape, embroidered in thread that caught the lamplight. "For $1, I was freed. For love, I stayed free." Silas watched from his place by the fire, understanding the weight of what she was doing. This sack had once been her prison, a symbol of shame and fear. Now she was transforming it, stitch by stitch, into something else entirely. When she finished, they hung the banner together above the cabin's gate. It moved slightly in the night breeze, the stitches gleaming faintly in the starlight. Awanita stood back, looking at her handiwork. The sack that once hid her face now proclaimed her freedom, her strength, her choice to stay and build something new. "Reckon that says it plain enough," Silas said softly, standing beside her. Awanita nodded, her hand finding his in the darkness. Above them, the banner moved gently, no longer a symbol of captivity, but of redemption, of a woman who had reclaimed not just her land, but herself. The weeks passed softly into winter, bringing shorter days and long, quiet evenings to Bitterroot Pass. Snow drifted down in gentle waves, coating the valley in pristine white. The land seemed to breathe easier now, as if the weight of old wrongs had finally lifted. In the afternoons, Awanita's cabin filled with the eager voices of children. They gathered around her kitchen table, their eyes wide as she taught them about the healing plants she'd known since childhood. She laid out dried herbs in neat rows, explaining each one's purpose with patient care. "This is yarrow," she would say, holding up the delicate white flowers. "It stops bleeding and fights fever." The children leaned forward, touching the dried plants with careful fingers, their faces serious with concentration. Some were settler children, others from native families, but here they sat together, learning the old ways that Awanita's grandmother had passed down. Outside, the steady rhythm of Silas's work marked the passing hours. He drove fence posts deep into the frozen ground along Awanita's eastern boundary, marking her land clear and proper. The sound of his hammer echoed across the snow-covered fields, a comfort in its regularity. As dusk approached each day, Awanita would step onto her porch, watching the last light fade from the mountains. Silas would come in from his work then, stamping snow from his boots, his breath making clouds in the cold air. Together, they would light their 2 lanterns, one for each window, the flames steady and bright against the gathering dark. 2 lights, Awanita would say softly, remembering that first night. Harder to put out. Inside the warm cabin, they knelt together in the lantern light, their heads bowed in evening prayer. Awanita's voice rose quiet but clear, thanking God for the mercy that had brought them here, for the land that was now rightfully hers, for the second chance at life they'd both been given. Silas's deep amen would follow, solid as the mountains themselves. On this particular evening, as they finished their prayers, a knock sounded at the door. Little Bear stood there, snow dusting his shoulders, clutching an official-looking envelope. "Mail rider asked me to bring this," he said, handing the letter to Awanita. "Said it came all the way from Washington Territory." Awanita settled in her chair by the fire to read, while Silas poured cups of hot coffee. Her eyes moved carefully over the words, taking in their meaning. The letter was formal, written on government stationery, but its message was clear. They wanted her to come and testify about frontier land rights, to tell her story to people who could make real changes. When she finished reading, she folded the paper carefully, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Silas watched her, waiting. "They want me to speak," she said finally. "To tell them how it was, how it still is for some." She looked up at him, then out the window where snow fell steadily past the lantern light. "But we've got more to build first." Silas nodded, understanding in his eyes. They had started something here, something that went beyond just the 2 of them. The mixed school was taking shape in town. The water board met regularly now, with Awanita's voice respected among them. Her healing classes were growing, bridging old divisions with shared knowledge. The lantern light danced on the snow outside, creating patterns like stars fallen to earth. Inside, warmth and peace filled the cabin. Not the false peace of silence, but the true peace that comes after justice, after healing. Awanita placed the letter carefully on the mantel, next to the carved elk bone comb Silas had given her. Above their heads, the transformed burlap banner still hung, its message a daily reminder of how far they'd come. The cedar sapling by the spring was taking root, growing stronger each day, just as they were. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall. The letter could wait. Right now they had this moment, this peace, this sense of purpose that filled their days. Right now, they had enough. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.